The day was supposed to be perfect. I had spent weeks planning everything. First-class tickets, a five-star resort, a week in paradise away from the noise of everyday life. It was meant to be a break, a reset, a time for us to just breathe and enjoy each other the way we used to. Vanessa had always talked about wanting to travel more, about wanting luxury, about how much she loved the idea of escaping to some place where no one knew us. So I made it happen. I wanted this trip to be a turning point, a memory we'd always hold on to. I never imagined she'd blindside me like this. We were standing in the terminal, the hum of the airport around us, a steady rhythm of flight announcements, rolling suitcases, chattering passengers rushing to their gates. She was gripping my hand, but there was something off about it, like she wasn't really here with me. I had noticed little things lately, the way she checked her phone a little too often, how she seemed distracted even when we were together. But I had ignored it. I had convinced myself it was just my imagination. Then she looked at me, her brown eyes filled with something hesitant, uncertain. And I knew. Jake, I need time to think. For a second, I didn't move, didn't breathe. The words landed like a punch to the gut, leaving me winded. Time to think? I repeated, as if saying it out loud would somehow make it make sense. She exhaled, pulling her hand away. Yeah, I don't know if this is what I want anymore. The boarding announcement echoed over the speakers. Our flight. The trip I had planned to fix whatever was happening between us. And now she was telling me she wasn't even sure she wanted to be here. You couldn't have told me this before we got to the airport? My voice was flat, controlled, but my pulse was pounding in my ears. She bit her lip, looking away. I thought I'd figure it out, but Jake, I need space. I need to know if this is the right thing for me. I let out a slow breath, the reality of it settling over me. She wasn't sure about me. She wasn't sure about us. We had been together for 3 years. 3 years of building something. 3 years of me always being the one to make things work. And now, when it was supposed to be our moment, she was hesitating. I could already see where this was going. She wanted time to think while she figured out if there was someone better out there. And if there wasn't, then she'd come back, expecting me to still be here. But I wasn't going to be. I reached into my bag, pulled out her boarding pass, and held it out to her. Take all the time you need. My voice was calm, too calm. She blinked, like she hadn't expected me to agree, like she had assumed I would fight for her, beg her, try to convince her to stay. Jake, I didn't mean, but I was already turning away. I walked off without another word, without looking back, heading straight toward the exit while she stood frozen in the middle of the terminal, still holding that one-way ticket. She had asked for time, so I gave it to her. I didn't drive straight home. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself in a bar not too far from the airport, the kind of place where no one asks questions. I didn't want to think, didn't want to process anything. I just wanted a drink, something strong enough to dull the sharp edges of my thoughts. The bartender set a whiskey in front of me. I didn't even taste it as I took the first sip. I was too busy replaying the moment over and over in my head. The hesitation in her voice, the way she pulled away like she had already made up her mind. I should have seen it coming. She had been pulling back for weeks, making excuses, canceling plans. And I had ignored it. I had told myself that we were just in a rough patch, that things would get better. What a joke. I glanced at my phone, half expecting a text from her. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe she had realized she made a mistake. Nothing. And that was the moment it hit me. She wasn't sitting somewhere crying over this. She wasn't heartbroken. She wasn't wondering if she'd done the right thing. She had already made the decision long before she said the words out loud. She had already pictured her life without me in it. The drink burned on the way down, but this time, it didn't feel like enough. I wasn't mad at her for leaving. Not really. People fall out of love. People change. That wasn't the part that stung. The part that wrecked me was that she had let me believe everything was fine. That she had let me plan a trip, let me pour my energy into us while she was already halfway out the door. I set my glass down. This wasn't just about Vanessa anymore. This was about me. I had spent too long putting other people first, waiting for someone to choose me, waiting to be enough. And where had it gotten me? Sitting in a dark bar, drinking alone, while the woman I thought was my future figured out if I was good enough to be in hers. No, that wasn't who I was going to be. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to Vanessa's number, and stared at it for a long second. Then I deleted it, blocked it. No more waiting, no more what-ifs. The man she left behind? He died today. The man I was about to become? She'd never be able to reach him. I signaled for the check, threw down some cash, and walked out without looking back. Just like I had at the airport. Let her have all the time she needed. I wouldn't be around when she was done thinking. The days after the airport were a blur. I woke up late, went through the motions of my job, ignored messages from friends asking if I was okay. I wasn't okay, not even close, but I didn't want to talk about it. What was there to say? My girlfriend told me she needed time to think, and instead of waiting around like a fool, I walked away. It sounded like strength. It sounded like I had taken control, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like I had lost, and that's what haunted me the most. Not that Vanessa had left, but that she had hesitated in the first place, because hesitation meant she had already been considering her options. She had already pictured a future without me in it. She'd already been pulling away. That's what burned. That's what twisted in my chest like a knife every time I thought about it. She hadn't chosen me, which meant she never truly saw me as the best option. I didn't need to know if she regretted it. I didn't need an apology, some half-hearted explanation about how she had been confused. I wasn't confused. I knew exactly where I stood with her, and I knew I was never going to be in that position again. So, I did what needed to be done. I cut her off. Completely. Deleted her number. Blocked her on everything. Social media, messages, email. Every single thread of connection between us severed. I didn't leave her a way back in. I didn't want explanations. I didn't want closure. I didn't want to be the guy waiting for her to come to her senses. I just wanted to move forward. But moving forward required something I didn't have. Power. I had spent years thinking I was doing fine. I had a decent job, made okay money, lived comfortably enough. But okay wasn't enough. I had wasted so much time just being good enough. Good enough to get by. Good enough to be in a stable relationship. Good enough to believe that working hard meant getting somewhere. But where had that gotten me? Nowhere. The truth hit me like a freight train. I had nothing. No leverage, no influence, no real financial stability. If I lost my job tomorrow, I'd be scrambling like everyone else. My savings? Mediocre at best. My investments? Non-existent. I had been living paycheck to paycheck, thinking I was doing well simply because I wasn't struggling. And I had spent years pouring my energy into a relationship with someone who wasn't even sure if she wanted to be with me. That was unacceptable. That was never going to happen again. I needed control. Over my time, my money, my choices, over who got access to me. So I threw myself into learning everything I could. Business, finance, investments. Not just how to make money, but how to keep it, multiply it, and leverage it. I read books, listened to audiobooks on my commute, watched interviews with billionaires, not just to see how they made their money, but to understand how they thought. Their mentality, their decision-making, their ability to see moves ahead of everyone else. I stopped wasting time on distractions. No more mindless scrolling, no more binge-watching nonsense shows that added nothing to my life. If I wasn't building something, I wasn't interested. I started studying the market. Stocks, crypto, startups. I remembered which companies had exploded in the past few years. I knew which industries were going to dominate. I started tracking trends, following where the real money moved. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about proving anything to Vanessa. This was about me. This was about making sure I was never in a position where someone had to think about choosing me. The changes weren't instant. At first, it was just small shifts. I started waking up earlier, getting to the gym before work. Not because I needed an instant transformation, but because I needed to build discipline. Discipline meant sticking to habits, even when I didn't feel like it. I cut down on unnecessary spending. No more eating out just because I was too lazy to cook. No more impulse buys. Every dollar I saved went straight into my investment account. I started with stocks. Small moves at first, carefully picking companies I knew would skyrocket in the next few years. Tech, AI, renewable energy. I didn't chase hype. I positioned myself where the real money would flow. Then came crypto. Bitcoin was still undervalued. Ethereum was still a sleeping giant. I remembered when people laughed at it, called it a bubble. I also remembered when those same people later cried about missing out. I wasn't going to miss out. I put every extra dollar into assets, not liabilities. No more spending money just to look like I had money. That's what Vanessa had always wanted. Appearance over substance. I wasn't playing that game anymore. The more I learned, the more I realized how stupid I had been before. I had spent years thinking small, thinking a stable job meant security, thinking a relationship meant happiness, thinking working hard meant progress. But real success wasn't about working hard. It was about working smart, thinking ahead, putting yourself in a position where no one could ever make you feel replaceable. Weeks turned into months. My bank account started growing. My portfolio doubled. I felt stronger, sharper, more in control. The person who had walked out of that airport was already gone. And the best part? I didn't miss Vanessa. Not once, not even a little. She had been right about one thing. She needed time to think. And I had given it to her. Only now, I was the man she would never have access to again. Work became an obsession. Not my job. The job was just a stepping stone, a temporary necessity while I built something bigger. I needed capital, and I needed it fast. Every paycheck that hit my account was already earmarked for investment. I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck anymore. I was living investment to investment. Every dollar I spent had to have a purpose. While my coworkers were busy planning their weekend getaways, wasting money on drinks, new clothes, or whatever temporary indulgence made their lives feel less mediocre, I was studying, researching, absorbing everything I could about the market. Tech was a no-brainer. AI, automation, electric vehicles, these weren't trendy guesses. They were inevitable. People laughed at companies like Tesla back then, thought crypto was a joke, dismissed AI as a fantasy. I didn't. I remembered what happened. I remembered watching it unfold, powerless to do anything about it. This time, I wasn't just watching. I bet big. I started small, investments just big enough to feel risky, but not reckless. Stocks in companies the world hadn't noticed yet. Coins that were undervalued but had massive potential. I didn't chase hype. I positioned myself before the hype started, and when the prices climbed, when the world finally caught on, I was already there, cashing in while everyone else scrambled to get in. It didn't happen overnight. At first, the gains were modest. A few percentage points here and there, slow and steady, but I knew what was coming. I had an edge no one else had. I didn't second-guess my moves. I didn't panic when markets dipped because I already knew which investments would bounce back. Then the real growth started. My portfolio doubled, then tripled. Money that used to take me a year to save was now just a few months of returns. I flipped stocks, reinvested everything. No big purchases, no unnecessary spending. I lived like I was still broke, because in my mind, I was. The goal wasn't to just make money. It was to reach a point where money was never a concern again. Every night I worked late, either at my job or on my investments. I ran on caffeine and pure, relentless focus. Sleep was an afterthought. I wasn't going to waste another second living the way I had before. And then came the moment I knew I was on the right path. The first real payday. I had been watching a small AI startup, one that I knew, without a doubt, would explode in the coming years. I had invested early, months before anyone was paying attention. Then, overnight, the news broke. A major partnership, a government contract. Stock prices skyrocketed. By the end of that week, my portfolio was sitting at 6 figures. It should have felt surreal, but it didn't. It felt right. It felt like I had finally taken control. I wasn't the same guy anymore. The one who had stood in that airport, blindsided, wondering why he wasn't good enough. The one who had let someone else's hesitation make him question his worth. No, that guy was long gone. And the best part? Vanessa hadn't reached out. Not yet. But I knew she would. People like her always come back. She just wouldn't like what she found when she did. Money changes everything. Not just your bank account, but how people see you, how they speak to you, how they adjust their tone when they realize you have something they want. At first, it was subtle. People who once ignored my messages suddenly responded in minutes. Business contacts who had brushed me off before were now circling back. A few friends from my past life, people I hadn't spoken to in years, started reaching out just to catch up. But I wasn't interested in catching up. I was interested in moving forward. The moment my bank account hit 7 figures, the shift became undeniable. The invitations started rolling in. Not the flashy, influencer-filled parties where people pretended to be rich while living off credit cards. No, these were the rooms where real power moved silently. Private networking events, investment summits, high-stakes poker nights where millionaires played with cash like it was pocket change, business dinners in exclusive clubs where the true elite, the hedge fund managers, the venture capitalists, the tech moguls, discussed billion-dollar deals over wine that cost more than my old rent. I walked into those rooms as an outsider. I walked out as one of them. At first, I listened more than I spoke. I didn't try to prove myself. The loudest people in the room were always the least important. I watched how they moved, how they thought, how they negotiated without saying too much. I saw how venture capitalists turned small startups into billion-dollar giants with a single investment. I learned how real estate moguls leveraged properties, flipping undervalued buildings into high-end developments that doubled and tripled in value. I paid attention to the way hedge fund managers manipulated markets, making millions off of tiny shifts that most people didn't even notice. The truth was, rich people didn't play the same game as everyone else. And I wasn't here to play small anymore. I adapted. Fast. I stopped thinking like a guy who was just trying to make money. I started thinking like a man who wanted control. The moment Vanessa found out about my success, I knew before she even reached out. People talk, especially in the circles I was now moving in. It started with little things, old acquaintances bringing up her name casually, testing the waters. Hey, ran into Vanessa the other day. She was asking about you. She seemed surprised when I mentioned your new place. She said she always knew you'd be successful one day. That last one almost made me laugh. She had always known? Where was that belief when she stood in that airport, ticket in hand, telling me she needed time to think? Where was that certainty when she hesitated? When she decided I wasn't enough for her? She had made her choice. Now she had to live with it. I didn't respond to the messages. I didn't ask about her. I didn't waste a single second thinking about whether she regretted leaving me. Because I already knew the answer. People like Vanessa never regret losing you. They regret losing access to you. The real test came at an exclusive investor gala a few weeks later. It was one of those events where the real money wasn't in the wine glasses or the luxury suits. It was in the conversations happening in the corners of the room. Deals being whispered over cocktails. Investments being locked in with a nod and a handshake. I had been invited by a well-connected venture capitalist, someone who had taken an interest in me after seeing the moves I had been making in the market. My name was starting to carry weight now. I wasn't just another rich guy. I was someone who understood how the game was played. And that's when I saw her, Vanessa. She was standing by the bar, drink in hand, wearing that same calculated smile she used to flash at me when she wanted something. Only now, she wasn't looking at me like I was just another option. She was looking at me like I was the prize. She didn't approach right away. She lingered, waiting for an opening, waiting for me to acknowledge her. I didn't. I continued my conversation, my posture relaxed, my tone calm. If she thought she could just slide back into my life like nothing had happened, she was badly mistaken. Finally, she took a step toward me. "Jake," she said, tilting her head slightly, her voice smooth as silk. "I was hoping I'd run into you." I turned slowly, meeting her eyes with a look so unreadable it made her hesitate. "Vanessa." My voice was polite, indifferent, as if she was just another person in the room, as if she wasn't even worth a second thought. She smiled, but I saw the flicker of uncertainty in her expression. "It's been a long time," she said. "You look different." "Do I?" I said, sipping my drink. Her eyes flickered down to my tailored suit, my expensive watch, the way people in the room subtly glanced toward me. She wasn't used to this version of me. She was used to the guy who would have dropped everything to talk to her, who would have felt lucky just to be in her presence. That man was dead. "You've been doing well," she continued, forcing a laugh. "I've heard your name a lot lately." I just nodded, offering nothing, letting the silence stretch long enough for her to feel it. She shifted slightly, adjusting her posture, trying to regain control. "I've been meaning to reach out," she said finally. Before she could finish, a woman walked up to me. One of my business contacts, a stunning investment banker I had been casually seeing, placed a hand lightly on my arm. "Jake," she said smoothly, ignoring Vanessa completely. "We're about to head upstairs for the private meeting. Are you coming?" Vanessa stiffened. I saw it in her eyes, the realization. She wasn't the most important woman in my world anymore. She wasn't special. She was replaceable. I turned to the woman and nodded. "Yeah, let's go." Then I glanced back at Vanessa, offering her a small, unreadable smile. "It was nice seeing you." And just like that, I walked away, leaving Vanessa standing there, watching as I disappeared into a world she no longer had access to. She had hesitated on me once. Now she would never get another chance. I thought she would take the hint. Move on. She didn't. It had been weeks since Vanessa first tried reaching out. A text, a call, a social media request. Each attempt was met with silence. I ignored her like she didn't exist, because to me, she didn't. But then came the invitation, delivered by hand in a thick, embossed envelope, the kind that screamed wealth and exclusivity. A private business gala, hosted by Ethan Carter, her new boyfriend. I turned the envelope over in my hand, taking my time before opening it. Ethan, the hedge fund guy, flashy money, high risk, the type of man who thrived on illusion. I had known his type before I even entered these circles, the kind who built their fortune on unstable ground, hoping no one would notice before it all came crashing down. And from what I had heard, that time was coming soon. The lawsuits were piling up, investors were starting to ask questions. His fund was losing steam, and the market was turning against him. The cracks were forming. And Vanessa? She had sensed it. This wasn't an invitation. It was a lifeline. She wasn't reaching out because she missed me. She was reaching out because she needed an exit strategy. I smirked. If she thought I was going to catch her fall, she had miscalculated. Again. So I accepted the invitation. It was time to end this. The venue was pure spectacle, a rooftop event at one of the city's most expensive hotels. I had been here before. Deals were made in places like these, not with contracts, but with whispered conversations and exchanged glances. The moment I stepped in, I could feel eyes turning toward me. Some of them knew who I was, others didn't, but they could sense it. The confidence, the presence. Money was one thing. Power was another. I was here for both. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne, and I took a glass, moving through the crowd with purpose. I wasn't here to mingle. I wasn't here to network. I was here to watch Vanessa realize just how much she had lost. It didn't take long for her to find me. "Jake," she breathed, appearing at my side like she had been waiting for this moment all night. I turned, letting my gaze sweep over her. She had dressed for the occasion, obviously. A sleek black dress, perfectly styled hair, the kind of elegance that belonged in rooms like these. But beneath the polish, I could see it, the uncertainty, the cracks in her confidence. Vanessa, I said, my tone smooth, unreadable. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I wasn't sure if you'd come. I took a slow sip of my drink, watching her over the rim of my glass. And yet, you invited me. Her smile wavered. She knew I had figured it out. I just thought it would be nice to catch up, she said lightly, though I could hear the tension in her voice. You've changed a lot. I raised an eyebrow. That happens when you stop wasting time on people who don't deserve it. Her throat bobbed slightly, but she kept her expression neutral. And then Ethan appeared. The man of the hour. I turned my attention toward him, studying him in real time. Tall, well-dressed, carrying himself like a man who still believed he was on top. But I saw the small details, the way his grip on his drink was a little too tight, the slight strain in his smile, the way his eyes scanned the room as if looking for threats. He knew. Maybe not fully, maybe not yet, but he could feel it. The empire he built was starting to crumble, and whether he admitted it or not, he was losing control. Ah, Jake, right? Ethan extended a hand. Vanessa's told me a lot about you. I took my time before shaking his hand, firm but unimpressed. I'm sure she has. Vanessa shifted awkwardly between us. Ethan grinned like he owned the room, but I could already see the nervous flicker in his eyes. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about what I represented. A man she once had. A man she had underestimated. So, what do you do? Ethan asked, still playing the role. I smiled, slow and measured. I run an investment firm. That got his attention. His eyes narrowed slightly. Hedge funds? I let out a short laugh. No, we deal in real assets. Things that hold value even when the market turns. The hit landed. I could see it in the way his jaw tensed. Because that was exactly what was happening to him. The market was turning and his assets weren't holding. Vanessa didn't pick up on the shift. She was too focused on me. We should talk more, she said, her voice soft, like she was already laying the groundwork for her backup plan. Privately. I held her gaze for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. Then I smiled. Of course. I watched her relax, thinking she had won something tonight, thinking she had reeled me back in. She had no idea. Tomorrow, Ethan's name would be everywhere. The lawsuits were about to go public. His funds were being investigated. The people at this event, the ones pretending to respect him, would turn on him the second they smelled weakness. And Vanessa? She was standing next to a man who would be ruined by morning. She was still playing the same game she always had. She just didn't realize she was about to lose. I clinked my glass against hers, my smirk unwavering. Let's talk, I said smoothly, because by the time I was done, she wouldn't just regret leaving me. She'd regret ever thinking she could come back. I led Vanessa to the rooftop lounge, the crisp night air carrying the hum of the city below. From up here, I could see the skyline. A skyline I now owned pieces of. Towers I had invested in. Buildings with my name on the contracts. She followed me, her heels clicking against the marble, her posture rehearsed, her smile just soft enough to be disarming. She thought she had me right where she wanted me. She thought she was about to slide back into my world. I gestured toward a private seating area, a sleek arrangement of leather chairs and a low-glass table. She sat first, smoothing her dress, crossing her legs like she had done 1,000 times before. But she wasn't the same woman I had once loved. And I sure as hell wasn't the same man who had once waited for her decision. She started talking, her voice delicate, carefully measured. She poured out her regrets, her nostalgia, her fake realization that I had been the one. The words were exactly what I had expected. Apologies wrapped in silk, an attempt to rewrite history. I was young, Jake. I was scared. I didn't know what I wanted back then. I let her talk. I watched as she spoke like a woman trying to control a narrative she had already lost. I thought I needed time, but I see now that I just needed you. The old me might have fallen for it, might have clung to the fantasy that she had genuinely realized her mistake. But the man sitting across from her now, he wasn't in the business of recycling regrets. I leaned back, exhaling slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then I turned to her, my voice calm, unshaken. You needed time to think. She blinked, hesitation, that single crack in her mask. Jake, that was, and I gave it to you. I met her eyes, unflinching, unwavering. Now you're out of time. Her breath hitched. Jake, wait. But I was already standing up. She reached out, fingers curling like she wanted to grab onto something solid, something real. But there was nothing left. Jake. She tried again, her voice lower now, urgent. Let's just talk. But I'd already turned away, done with the conversation before it had even begun. I walked away into the night without a single glance back. The next morning, I woke up to exactly what I had been expecting. My phone was buzzing nonstop, notifications lighting up the screen, news alerts, emails from colleagues, a few missed calls. The headlines were everywhere, the kind of financial scandal that sent shockwaves through Wall Street. Ethan Carter, the man who had once strutted through elite circles with the arrogance of someone who believed he was untouchable, had finally fallen. I took my time getting out of bed, stretching before walking over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The city stretched out before me, a skyline that had once felt so distant, so impossible. But now, I owned parts of it. Now, I was the man people watched, the name that circulated in the highest rooms of power. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the news. Hedge fund star Ethan Carter under investigation for financial misconduct. SEC freezes Carter Fund assets amid fraud allegations. Once promising billionaire faces ruin as investors flee. I smirked. I had seen it coming before the rest of the world did. I had known this moment would come before Ethan himself did. A man like him, flashy wealth, reckless spending, built entirely on hype, he was never built to last. His entire empire had been a house of cards, and now, the wind had blown it all away. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. And Vanessa? She had no idea how deep the fallout would go. She had spent her entire life chasing security, trading up, picking men based on how much they could offer her, how well they fit into the picture of the life she wanted. Now she was watching everything she built collapse around her. I imagined her waking up, picking up her phone, seeing the same headlines I was reading now. That first moment of confusion, then denial, then sheer panic as she scrolled through the articles. Ethan's name, dragged through the mud. Their shared world, crumbling under the weight of legal battles, lost investors, and a public downfall that would ensure he never worked in finance again. And worse, she was caught in the mess with him. I had done my research. She had tied herself to him in ways she couldn't easily untangle. Maybe she wasn't legally responsible for his failures, but perception was everything in the circles she so desperately wanted to remain in. Association with failure was failure itself, and Vanessa? She had no backup plan. I could already picture the way it would play out. The panic in her voice as she tried to call him. The growing dread as she realized he wasn't answering, that he was too busy dealing with his own destruction to worry about her. That all the luxury, all the expensive gifts, all the first-class tickets and penthouse views had been borrowed time. She had gambled everything, believing Ethan was her golden ticket. She had bet on the wrong man. And the only man who could have saved her? She had walked away from him years ago. My phone buzzed. I didn't even need to check the screen. I already knew who it was. Vanessa. She had finally cracked. I let it ring, staring down at the flashing name with a smirk before flipping the phone over on the counter. She was out of time, and I had no interest in revisiting old stories. Instead, I set my coffee down and stepped onto the balcony. The cold morning air hit my skin, but I barely felt it. Below me, the city moved like it always did, millions of people rushing through their lives, chasing something, success, wealth, meaning. For years, I had been just like them, running, trying, waiting for validation that I was good enough. But now, I wasn't running anymore. Now I wasn't proving anything to anyone. Now I was the man people chased. I leaned against the railing, exhaling slowly. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Vanessa, not at Ethan, not at the past. I had spent too much time looking backward, too much time waiting for the moment when I would finally feel like I had won. But as I stood there, watching the sunrise over a city that was now mine, I realized I had already won. And Vanessa? She was just a story I once knew. By midday, the calls had stopped. I checked my phone again. Not a single message from Vanessa now. She had given up. Maybe she finally understood. Maybe she had just moved on to her next attempt at survival, looking for a new man to pull her out of the mess she had fallen into. It didn't matter. I had built my life so far beyond her reach that she was irrelevant now. I spent the afternoon finalizing a deal, an acquisition of a tech company that had been on my radar for months, the kind of deal that put me in rooms Ethan never would have entered. By the evening, I was back on the balcony, whiskey in hand this time, watching the city lights flicker to life. I thought about Vanessa one last time, not with regret, not with bitterness, but with indifference. She had been a chapter, but that's all she was. And me? I wasn't just a man with money anymore. I was a man with power, and I had no intention of stopping.